Project Q is real. It has now been officially confirmed by Sony, but who the heck is this device actually for? Today we'll discuss what it is, what it isn't, and attempt to understand why PlayStation is even bothering with this in the first place. So to start, we actually need to go back to April 5th, because that's when Tom Henderson of Insider Gaming broke the story that Sony was working on a new PlayStation handheld that would not be a traditional handheld in the vein of a PSP or a Vita, and actually not even a cloud gaming device, but instead a remote play only device that would always require an internet connection to function. Fast forward to the most recent PlayStation showcase, and Sony has pretty much confirmed all of what was in Henderson's original report. We actually had our first look here at the hardware itself, which literally looks as if they cut a DualSense controller in half and then slapped an 8-inch HD screen right in the middle that will play games via remote play from a PS5 in up to 60 frames per second. Still no price or an exact release date, but the PS5 aspect there is key because this device will require a PS5 to function. You have to connect to a PlayStation 5 to play anything. This will not run native games on its own. Now, one of the cool things about remote play, if you've never used it before, you do not have to actually be within close physical proximity to your PlayStation. You could actually have your PS5 at home, and then you could be in a totally different area. As long as they are both connected to the internet and you've set up the remote play and all that stuff, then you would be able to connect. Of course, what is one of the greatest strengths of remote play is also one of the greatest weaknesses because you are totally reliant on that internet connection. So if you have a really slow connection, if it's not a reliable connection, then your gameplay is going to suffer. And at least for me, I've not actually tried remote play in a while, but even in the most ideal scenarios, there is still always just a little bit of an input lag. Now, maybe it's gotten better in recent years. I would hope so if they're making a whole device dedicated to this. So as I said, I don't use it much personally. I think remote play itself, though, is a really nice to have feature, kind of like an add-on. And it's actually something that PlayStation has been really big on and supporting all the way back since the PSP and the PS3, then again with PS4 and the Vita. But it was always just that, a feature, and not the core function of the device. Look, here's the reality. PlayStation was burned pretty bad by the Vita. At least that's how they see it from their point of view, considering sales numbers weren't what they hoped. Now, as a day one Vita owner myself, I say there was a lot more Sony could have done to help make Vita a success, which I still believe that was a device well ahead of its time. Now, what's funny is that over the years since Sony stopped making the PlayStation Vita, it's gotten more and more and more of a following online as people have really started to see how great this device can actually be. And the hardware itself is still great today. The reality is they released the Vita in what was a very different market and a very different time. But now we're again in a very different market. The Nintendo Switch is already one of the top 3 best-selling consoles of all time, guys. Think about that. And with no successor in sight for the immediate near future of the Nintendo Switch, it seriously could threaten the PS2 as the best-selling console of all time. There's also the Steam Deck, which of course not nearly the sales numbers that the Switch has, even though Valve does not release sales numbers. The Steam Deck, though, as a device has garnered praise from video game enthusiasts and critics alike as just a very well-made device. And what both of these devices have in common is that they aren't asking devs to develop titles solely for the handheld, as was the case with the older handhelds like the Vita. With the incredible success so far of the PS5, just imagine for a moment. Imagine a world, if you will, where Sony announced a handheld device that could play all the same games you already own on the PS5, albeit with some downgrades to run effectively on the handheld hardware. That's a device that would be a for sure day one purchase for me. Now, I don't know about all the tech behind it. Maybe people would say that that would cost way too much. All I know is that Steam Deck is already doing it right now with major titles running very effectively on the hardware. But instead, what we get is a device capable of playing those PS5 games, but only via remote play, which to me makes this hardware much closer to something like Nintendo's failed Wii U as opposed to a Switch or Steam Deck competitor. Now, for one of the most head-scratching parts about this is that PS5 already supports remote play on laptops, PCs, tablets, even mobile phones, devices that many of us already have one or even multiple of. You can connect your DualSense wirelessly on all of these. They even have an officially licensed backbone controller that you can actually slot your iPhone into to make it feel more like a true handheld. So remote play, it's clearly something they really care about as a feature. They've cared about it in the past and they still care about it today. And I'll say, I think it's great that there are options out there for people who really use that feature and who really, even in some cases, rely on that feature. But I have to think that gamers who know they use remote play and really enjoy using remote play on the PS5, don't you guys already have a setup using some of those devices that we just mentioned that you're already happy with? It seems like Sony is really hoping the DualSense features and maybe the quality of the screen will really win out here. We still don't know a lot about the quality of the screen, but I would assume that it's going to be pretty good. Now, to be fair, there's also another key part of this that at the time of this recording, we still aren't sure about, and that's the price. I hope I'm wrong on this, guys, but I feel like the price of this thing is going to shock people when they finally announce it. Just starting as a baseline, we already know the price of a DualSense controller controller on its own is $80 brand new. As for the screen, if you look at modern tablets like the 8-inch Kindle Fire, goes for about $100. Amazon, of course, is known for their really aggressive pricing. Another thing to consider is the DualSense Edge controller, which Sony sells for $200 new, which, by the way, is the same price you can buy a brand new Nintendo Switch Lite for. So where will this new remote play device sit in terms of pricing? Will they try to get it below the DualSense Edge controller, or is it going to be just above the DualSense Edge controller? For this thing to have any chance at all, I think they need to be really aggressive with the pricing here. I think a starting price of $150 would be ideal, but I don't think there's any chance whatsoever that it actually releases for that. I don't think it releases for less than $200. I'd be pleasantly surprised if it did. Anything $250 or more, and I think it's going to be really hard for the vast majority of people who would be interested in this thing to justify. I mean, remember guys, you already have to have a PS5 to use this thing for it to function at all. Another element that's working against Project Q is battery life, which reportedly lasts just 3 to 4 hours. Now, presumably you could plug it in to keep playing, but again, then you kind of lose some of the benefits of having the freedom that you can move the device around. I do think there are a few groups of people where a device like this could be really useful. For starters, if you're in a family setting with multiple people sharing one TV, this would give gamers a way to play even while others are watching something different on the TV. People living in small apartments or a college dorm setting, I could see it being useful there as well. But again, the remote play feature is all already possible with devices that you likely already have. I guess it does provide a more all-in-one solution with a singular focus, so it keeps your other devices free and saves you from draining their batteries if you have the Q to use for gaming. Ultimately, this feels like an incredibly niche product. The tech in it is pretty straightforward though, and not a lot of new tech, so hopefully there wasn't a lot of R&D costs associated with it. Sony also doesn't even have to worry about any sort of dedicated support for this device, so it's not like they're going to get burned like they did with the Vita, because just inherently it can play any PS5 game, but of course it requires that system and an internet connection to be able to do so, and it doesn't run it natively. It's all over remote play. I have to wonder if maybe they were toying around with the idea of a true successor to the PSP and Vita, but ultimately scrapped it. It's interesting to see them put so much effort behind PSVR, for example, considering the sales of it were not great. At least I don't think they were great. Just think of it like this. The PS Vita was considered a commercial failure and it sold around 16 million units. Compare that to the last official numbers we got for the first generation PlayStation VR, which only sold 5 million units. As we all know, Sony did make a successor to PSVR and they're currently making a strong push for PSVR 2. And again, this is something that requires a lot of software built from the ground up, specifically with VR in mind. And I have to admit, I am totally 100% biased here. I want to see a true Sony handheld, a true successor to PS Vita, and I'm also not the biggest fan of VR. But what about you guys out there? I'd really love to hear if any of you are legitimately looking forward to Project Q. Let me know in the comments, what are your specific use cases where you think this device would be really useful and justify what could be a $200 to $250 price tag. If you want to see more PlayStation content from me, go ahead and subscribe to the channel to let me know that you'd like to see more videos like this. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.